Hello, welcome to lecture number 7 on collecting data. I'd like to start this lecture with just a quick anecdote. For most of us, if we had awakened this morning with a sore throat, we probably would have thought to ourselves, I'm way too busy to address it, it'll go away as the day progresses, and we might just ignore that sore throat. However, if by tomorrow or the next day we still felt that sore throat, many of us would try some home remedy. It might be tea mixed with honey, it might be a particular food item that our parents or grandparents had told us is a help for sore throats. Whatever it is that we would choose to do, we might do that on a non-medical, non-physician basis. We would do something on our own. However, at some point, if that sore throat did not go away, we might seek further medical attention. Now envision how you would feel if you were at your medical physician's office, and as you were called into the examination room, the physician looked at you and said, "Oh, sore throat I see here, you put on your record. Here," pulls out a prescription pad, writes down something, and hands you the prescription. For most of us, we would not feel that we had been properly diagnosed. Now the reality is, statistically, that physician has probably been seeing a lot of sore throats, and generally they probably are going to be correct and accurate in whatever their diagnosis is and their therapeutic treatment that they're prescribing. However, we might be the exception. Everyone else just had the run-of-the-mill sore throat, but we have something very unique and we want to be examined and properly diagnosed. So we expect the physician to ask questions, to perhaps listen to our heart, look down our throats, look in our ears, whatever an exam would consist of, we would want to have received that and not simply have the doctor come into the room and say, "Oh, sore throat, here's what you need to do." Similarly, our clients want us to be sure that we diagnose before we prescribe if we're the consultant. As a client, you want that consultant to make sure that they demonstrate that they understand that they've done the equivalent of the proper diagnosis. So, how does that go about happening? The high recommendation for me is that you should do this collaboratively. It should be a mutual exercise, so that both client and consultant have responsibility. Sometimes doing it in tandem, sometimes doing it in parallel. Whatever the case may be, both should have exposure to the organization's current issues, how the business is being transacted, understand it in a way that makes the recommendation all that more viable and all that more real. So it's important that we go native, if you will, into the organization. Just like you wouldn't expect the consultant who recently came from BMW, the automobile manufacturer, and suggest to Hyundai that they should do exactly what BMW does. It wouldn't make sense. Very different cars, very different companies, different cultures, so you can't apply what was done in one organization cleanly to another if it's not really a fit. Similarly, I think we would all be laughed at if, as consultants, we went into McDonald's and recommended they put tablecloths and flowers on the tables. That's not their business, it's not their culture, it's not a fit with how they choose to do things. It would be diagnostically incorrect and inappropriate because it shows you didn't really understand what it is that you were seeing and you didn't understand the business that you're consulting with. So, some of the ways we can go about collecting data. We can conduct surveys or questionnaires where you ask people to provide feedback or insight either on how they perceive things. It could be on judging how their subordinates, their peers, their supervisors do things, comparing self to others. There are all kinds of ways to do this, but you can do it through essentially paper and pencil survey interview type interventions. Now you can even do it electronically on the internet where people can just go to a website and answer questions. Some of the upside to that, it's very inexpensive to do. The downside, the key downside is people will very often answer what they think they're supposed to answer. They'll give you what they perceive you're looking for at times and not always what is the reality. But one of the ways you can go about collecting data, interviews or surveys. Another way to do it is through a telephone or face-to-face interview, where you actually have the chance to engage with the person, interact, ask follow-up questions, which it's hard to do on a survey since it's typically a forced choice. So in an interview, it's a little bit more free-form, open-ended questions, and you're able to sometimes get greater clarity or confirmation of certain facts, ideas, etc. A third way that often is used is observation, actually seeing people at work. Now, there is what's called the Hawthorne Effect, where once you introduce the observer, it sometimes changes the environment. So be aware if that's going to be a factor in observing whatever this consulting project would entail. But being able to observe people as they work is a very good way to identify where some of the holdups are, the bottlenecks, the problems that people confront in the completion of the tasks. A fourth way is to look at archival data, that being the information that's collected in the Human Resources Department. What's the average tenure of the employees? Let's look at performance appraisals to see what trends we can identify there. Is there a difference in terms of how people who with one educational level perform versus others? So any kind of documentation and data that's been collected over time would be referred to as archival data, and depending on the project, may make sense to use as well.